Welcome to the Red Archive channel. Today we will tell you a story that shocked all of Russia and forever changed perceptions of teenage cruelty. In the winter of 2010 to 2011, two schoolboys from Irkutsk turned the quiet Akademgorodok into a zone of terror. They were called the Akademgorodok Maniacs and the Hammer Killers. Over 6 months, they killed 6 people and injured 9 more. The most terrible thing, they filmed their crimes on video and considered themselves gods. This story is based on court materials, witness testimonies, and confessions of the killers themselves. Part 1. Meeting the Killers. Artyom Alexandrovich Anufriev was born on October 4, 1992, in an ordinary Irkutsk family. Outwardly unremarkable teenager. Average height, thin, with long hair. He studied poorly, had almost no friends. His only close person became classmate Nikita Lytkin. Nikita Vakhtangovich Lytkin was born on March 24, 1993. Also from a simple family, also an outcast at school. The guys became friends on the basis of common interests: computer games, horror films, and hatred of the whole world. Both teenagers lived in Akademgorodok, the most prestigious and calm district of Irkutsk. This is a place where scientists, teachers, and intelligentsia live. Here, rarely anything happens. People don't lock doors. Children walk until late. It was precisely this atmosphere of security that two schoolboys would destroy. By 2010, the guys had finally become outcasts. At school, neither teachers nor classmates liked them. At home, they also found no understanding. Gradually, they created their own world, gloomy, full of hatred and cruelty. Artyom and Nikita were fascinated by the work of serial killers. They were especially inspired by Alexander Pichushkin, the Bitsa Park maniac, whose trial was taking place in 2007. The teenagers studied the methods of famous maniacs, read their interviews, analyzed murder techniques. They developed their own philosophy. They decided they were higher beings, gods who had the right to dispose of others' lives. Ordinary people seemed to them bio-trash, unworthy of existence. Part 2. Planning crimes. In autumn 2010, talk about superiority over people grew into plans for real murders. 18-year-old Anufriev became the main ideologist, and 17-year-old Lytkin, the executor of his will. They prepared carefully. They studied the district, chose victims, thought through attack methods. They decided to make hammers and bats their weapons. Simple tools that are easy to get and don't need registration. Special attention was paid to documenting future crimes. Anufriev bought a video camera, Lytkin a voice recorder. They planned to film murders to later re-watch and enjoy what they had done. On the internet, the teenagers created groups where they discussed plans, shared gloomy fantasies, looked for like-minded people. Their correspondence was full of sadistic details and hatred for humanity. On November 14, 2010, they committed their first attack. The victim was a random passerby in Akademgorodok. The woman was beaten, but she survived. The taste of blood intoxicated the young sadists. They realized they could cause pain and suffering with impunity. Part 3. First murders. December 1, 2010, Anufriev and Lytkin committed their first murder. The victim was 17-year-old Alyona Malkova, a student of pedagogical college. The girl was returning home late in the evening when two teenagers attacked her. The killers beat Alyona with hammers, after which they violated the body. Everything happening was recorded on video. For them, this was not just a crime, but a kind of initiation ritual into gods of death. December 6, 2010, 69-year-old Alevtina Kuydina was killed. The pensioner worked as a cleaner and was returning from the night shift. The maniacs attacked her near her house. The woman was beaten with hammers and received more than 30 knife wounds. The particular cruelty of this murder shocked even experienced investigators. The killers didn't just take the life of a defenseless old woman. They tormented her, deriving sadistic pleasure from her suffering. December 15, 2010. 12-year-old Danila Semenov became a victim. The boy was walking from school when the maniacs intercepted him. This crime especially shocked the public. The murder of a child crossed all conceivable boundaries. Danila was beaten with hammers and bats right on the street in broad daylight. There were no witnesses. In Akademgorodok, during the day, there are few people. Everyone is at work or at institutes. The killers acted brazenly and with impunity. Part 4. Escalation of violence. After murdering the child, the maniacs' appetites only grew. They began hunting more frequently, became more cruel, experimented with new ways of causing pain. January 9, 2011, 56-year-old Tatyana Petrova was killed. The woman was beaten with hammers near her house. The killers took her purse, but money didn't interest them. The main thing was pleasure from killing. January 27, 2011, a pregnant woman became a victim. She was beaten, but miraculously survived by pretending to be dead. The maniacs thought she had died and left. The woman was taken to the hospital with severe injuries, but saved her own life and her child's. February 21, 2011. 45-year-old Alexander Maksimov was killed. The man was returning in an intoxicated state from his sister's when the hammer killers attacked him. This murder was distinguished by particular cruelty. Lytkin shot the victim in the back of the head with a pneumatic pistol, and Anufriev tried to gouge out his eyes. Maksimov's body was found with a completely smashed head. He was buried in a closed coffin. The skull remains were seized as material evidence. Part 5. Psychology of killers. Between crimes, Anufriev and Lytkin led the ordinary life of teenagers. They went to school, sat at home at computers, communicated on the internet. But their inner world was filled with darkness and cruelty. On social networks, they created groups with names like Academic Killer and Death to Humanity. There they posted photos of murder weapons, discussed plans for new crimes, looked for like-minded people. Their correspondence shocked with cynicism and cold-bloodedness. About murders they wrote as entertainment, calling victims meat and bio-trash. No pangs of conscience, no regret, only pride in what was done. Psychologists later noted that the teenagers created their own value system in which murder became the highest manifestation of their divine nature. They sincerely considered themselves above ordinary people and having the right to life and death. Video recording of crimes played a special role. For the maniacs, this was a way to capture their greatness, create proof of their superiority. They rewatched recordings, enjoying reliving the murders. Part 6. Operation to Capture. By spring 2011, an atmosphere of fear reigned in Akademgorodok. People were afraid to go out on streets in the dark. Parents didn't let children out alone. The police worked in an enhanced mode but couldn't find the killers. The criminals acted cunningly. They attacked in deserted places, carefully chose victims, left no clues. Moreover, no one could believe that behind the series of brutal murders stood ordinary schoolboys. The compiled photo fits were inaccurate. Witnesses poorly remembered the attackers or saw them briefly. The investigation considered versions about visiting bandits, mentally ill people, drug addicts, but not about local teenagers. The denouement came unexpectedly. In March 2011, Nikita Lytkin's uncle, Vladislav, gave his nephew his video camera for filming a school event. A few days later, he took the camera back. At home, Vladislav decided to watch what his nephew had filmed. Instead of school footage, he saw a recording of Alevtina Kuydina's murder. On the video, it was clearly visible how two teenagers beat a pensioner with hammers and then mock the body. Vladislav recognized his nephew as one of the killers. In shock from what he saw, he immediately went to the police, handing over the recording to investigators. Part 7. Detention and Confessions. April 5, 2011. Artyom Anufriev and Nikita Lytkin were detained right in Akademgorodok. The operation was conducted quickly and quietly. None of the residents even understood that serial killers had lived next to them. At the very first interrogation, the teenagers confessed everything. Moreover, they were proud of what they had done and told in detail about each crime. No attempts to hide guilt or shift responsibility to each other. During searches in Anufriev's and Lytkin's apartments, they found a real museum of horrors. Hammers, bats, knives, pneumatic weapons, flashcards with murder recordings, and also 4 human teeth, trophies that the killers pulled out from victims. Investigators were shocked by the teenagers' cold-bloodedness. They talked about murders in a calm tone, as if it were about a computer game. No emotions, no repentance, only satisfaction from a job well done. That same day, another murder was planned. The maniacs had already chosen a victim and were preparing to attack. Their detention saved the life of one more person. Part 8. Investigation and Examinations. The investigation of the Akademgorodok Maniacs case became one of the most complex in the history of Irkutsk police. The materials occupied 49 volumes, thousands of pages of testimonies, examinations, protocols. The main task was to establish the teenagers' sanity. If the examination recognized them as insane, they would avoid criminal responsibility and end up in compulsory treatment. A comprehensive psychiatric examination lasted several months. Leading specialists of the country studied the killers' personalities, their behavior, motives of crimes. The result was unequivocal. Both teenagers were completely sane. They were aware of the social danger of their actions, could control them, understood the difference between good and evil. They simply chose evil. The examination also revealed sadistic inclinations and antisocial personality disorder in both. But this didn't exempt them from responsibility. They remained capable and subject to trial. Parallel to this, investigators restored the chronology of all crimes. Many episodes were established only thanks to the killer's own confessions and found video recordings. Part 9. Trial Process. The trial of the Akademgorodok Maniacs began in August 2012 and became one of the most high-profile in modern Russian history. The entire hall was filled with journalists, relatives of victims, simply curious people. Anufriev and Lytkin behaved defiantly. They showed no repentance, sometimes smirked when details of their crimes were read. For them, the trial was another opportunity to show off and demonstrate their superiority. October 16, 2012, right in the courtroom, Anufriev attempted suicide. He cut his neck and stomach with a razor blade that he had brought in his sock. The teenager was urgently hospitalized, but his life was saved. This was a theatrical gesture. Anufriev wanted to attract attention to himself and show that even facing justice he remained master of his fate. But the calculation didn't pay off. The public was only outraged by this. Lytkin behaved more restrained, but also showed no signs of repentance. He answered questions monosyllabically, mostly remained silent. But when he talked about crimes, he livened up and went into details. Victims and their relatives demanded maximum punishment. It was especially hard to listen to the mother of murdered 12-year-old Danila Semenov. She asked the court to make it so these creatures never kill anyone else. Part 10. Verdict and consequences. April 2, 2013, the Irkutsk Regional Court issued a verdict. Artyom Anufriev, as organizer and ideological inspirer, received life imprisonment. Nikita Lytkin was sentenced to 24 years in a strict regime colony. After the verdict was announced, Anufriev shouted toward the victims, "Well, are you satisfied?" Even at this moment, he showed not a drop of repentance or regret about what was done. The Supreme Court of Russia reviewed appeals but left Anufriev's sentence unchanged. For Lytkin, the term was reduced to 20 years, but this changed little. He still had to spend most of his life in prison. The case of the Akademgorodok Maniacs became a turning point in Russian criminology. For the first time, teenagers committed a series of such cruel and cold-blooded murders. This forced a reconsideration of approaches to preventing juvenile crime. Psychologists and criminologists studied this case as an example of how ordinary schoolboys can turn into merciless killers. Special attention was paid to the role of the Internet and social networks in forming criminal ideology. Part 11. Life after verdict. Anufriev is serving a life sentence in a special regime colony. Periodically, he gives interviews to journalists in which he continues to justify his crimes and deny part of the charges. In one recent interview, he stated, "I am a killer, but not a maniac. A maniac is someone who kills for the process. I killed for an idea." Even years later, he doesn't recognize the monstrosity of his actions. Lytkin was transferred to strict regime colony number 7 in Angarsk. There he behaved relatively quietly, didn't violate the regime, tried to get an education, but internal demons didn't leave him. November 30th, 2021, Nikita Lytkin committed suicide in his cell. He was only 28 years old. He hanged himself, leaving no suicide note. He had served exactly half of his assigned term. The reasons for suicide remained unknown. Perhaps his conscience tormented him for what was done, or perhaps he simply couldn't endure prison life and the prospect of spending another 10 years behind bars. Part 12. Impact on society. The case of the Akademgorodok Maniacs had a huge impact on Russian society. For the first time, the problem of teenage cruelty in the era of the Internet and social networks manifested so clearly. After this case, control over extremist groups on the Internet was strengthened. They began blocking sites promoting violence and cruelty. Criminal liability was introduced for creating death groups. In schools, they began conducting special programs for preventing extremism and violence. Psychologists developed tests to identify potentially dangerous teenagers at an early stage. Parents became more attentive to monitoring their children's internet activity. Many families reconsidered approaches to upbringing, paying more attention to adolescents' emotional development. Mass media also changed approaches to covering such crimes. They began to focus less on the personalities of criminals so as not to create an aura of romance for them and not provoke imitation. Conclusion. The story of the Akademgorodok Maniacs is a story about how two ordinary teenagers turned into monsters. They grew up in prosperous families, in a good district, had all opportunities for normal life. But they chose the path of evil and cruelty. What turned schoolboys into killers? The influence of the Internet and horror films? Problems in family and school? Innate predisposition to violence? Or a fatal combination of circumstances? Most likely, a complex of factors worked. Social isolation, dissatisfaction with life, influence of destructive content, mutual infection with ideas of superiority over people, all this together created two monsters. 6 people died, 9 received severe injuries, hundreds of Akademgorodok residents experienced psychological trauma. Victims' families still haven't recovered from the loss. And 2 teenagers destroyed not only others' lives, but their own as well. One of them will spend his entire remaining life in prison. The second committed suicide, unable to bear the weight of what was done. Their story became a warning for society. One cannot ignore alarming signals in teenagers' behavior. The case of the Akademgorodok Maniacs is closed, but the questions it raised remain open. How to prevent the appearance of new young killers? How to protect society from teenagers choosing the path of evil? How to raise a generation that will carry good, not destruction? These questions are relevant even today, more than 10 years after the tragedy in Akademgorodok. And how we answer them determines the safety of our children and the future of our society. Friends, what do you think about this tragic story? Could these crimes have been prevented? What lessons should society learn from the case of the Akademgorodok Maniacs? Write your opinions in the comments. If the material was interesting, subscribe to the Red Archive channel and turn on notifications. We continue to tell about real criminal cases that shocked Russia and the whole world. See you in the next episode.